Hello everyone, my name is Saranjeet. I'm a research software engineer from Imperial College London, and I'm very fortunate to be chairing this panel. It's my first DRI retreat, so I'm a bit anxious about how am I going to chair, but hopefully it goes well. So welcome to this very first panel on building trust and effective communication between DRI professionals and researchers from different disciplines. We have 5 panelists, and I would like invite them to introduce themselves, starting from here.
Yes, hi, I'm Niklas. I'm also an RSE at Durham University for a project in crystallography, which is also the field where I come from. And so I think I will be also have more of my academic hat on there, because a lot of what I do is to actually talk to the community, gather requirements, and then bring that into the team. I also do a lot of development, but also this work.
Thank you, Niklas.
I'm Tobias Weinzierl. I'm from Durham University. I'm professor in high performance computing and the director of the Institute for Data Science. And I love the efficient implementation of multi-scale methods. So that's where I really come from.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Massimillano Fasi from the University of Leeds, and I'm also an academic. I'm a lecturer in software engineering.
Hi, I'm Kirsty Merrett. I am a research support librarian. I'm the lead for research data management at the University of Bristol, where we run the repository, find solutions for the researchers and students as well, let's not forget those, to make sure that they've got technical ways to store and share their data. I work quite closely with our ACRC, the Advanced Centre for Computer... ACRC, Gethin, please tell me what you are. Advanced Centre for Computing Research. Thank you. Is that about right, Polly? The people who deal with the technical stuff. But really, the thing that I do is I'm that intersection between working out the billions of systems that the university has got, all the policies that go with that, all the policies that go with the funders, and working out how we can get what we've got to match with what researchers and students need.
Hello everyone, I'm Arianna Ciula. Apologies for having missed the introduction. There was an accident on the track, so the train was delayed. I am the director of King's Digital Lab, which is a research software engineering team in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at King's College London. So we deal with the development of software, in particular related to web environments, for the arts and humanities and cultural heritage in particular. The team is 13 people, and we work closely with the central services. Now there's a new unit called eResearch. I know someone else, Matt Penn, I think is coming to the DRI Retreat later in the week. So we just actually finished the migration of all our around 120 projects of different sizes and shapes into that central infrastructure. And obviously we work with researchers quite closely to develop different type of digital projects. So very glad to be here.
Thank you, Arianna. Thank you all the panelists. I would like to remind that please feel free to use Slido to ask your questions. People in the room and also people online, feel free to use Slido and we can take your questions from there. To begin with, we have our first question to the panelists. How have you sustained long-term relationships between DRI professionals and researchers? Are you aware of any other collaborative processes that we can learn from? Anybody from the panelists, if you want to take this question?
Yeah, maybe I can start. I mean, it is always hard work. We have a lot of collaborators which are very loosely attached to the project, I would say, which are basically a part of our target audience. And on one hand, you need to, I think for me it's always a bit difficult to say when to bring them in. Like on one hand, we want to have something for them to play with, for them to integrate the software into. But on the other hand, yes, we don't want to get there too late, so that we have something that nobody really needs. So yes, but you basically need to actively reach out to people and realize that yes, communication will very quickly break down if you are not on top of it.
Thanks, Niklas. Did anybody have any other things to add?
Could you repeat the question, please? It's very difficult. It's not written in front of me. It'll go.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is, how have you sustained long-term relationships between DRI professionals and researchers. Are you aware of any other collaborative processes we can learn from?
I think that it's quite a complicated thing to unravel there, mainly because you have issues where you've got researchers that move from institutions to institution. You've got people who are chasing roles from institution to institution, and probably the very best way of building up those relationships is by being somewhere for a long time. So the two things are at odds with each other. I think in terms of, certainly from Bristol's perspective, what we've done is we've worked very closely with ACRC for years, like we're talking over a decade, which means that even if not everyone is the same as the initial tranche of people who joined and started up these wonderful things, at least you've got that continuity, that kind of institutional memory of what we do, what our purpose is, and who those networks are. But we're still faced at a time where we've got issues with, kind of downsizing of groups, of teams. We're not expanding to meet the ever-increasing need. So we're doing more with less people. And I think that probably the solution, that the best possible workable, practical solution that we can have is to look at those teams outside, like the networks that you build outside of your institution. So whether that is like N8 or UK Reproducibility Network, or if at Bristol we're part of GW4, which is the Great Western 4. So other institutions where you can build that capacity and that knowledge, where you've got that slightly better sense of camaraderie, perhaps, especially if you feel that you might be up against it a bit in your own institution. And I think by doing that, you get a reputation which then builds your confidence of being able to go to people and say, hey, we actually are experts on this thing. Come and talk to us, because I know what Alan said in the opening salvo, we are experts in our field, and I absolutely 100% think that that is the case, but I do not think that that's always reflected in the way that the siloed way we work responds to our calls for help or our need of urgency to address a particular issue, because everyone's very siloed. And one of the disadvantages of moving from institution to institution is that we never quite realise that, hey, we're doing the same thing again that we did 4 years ago. Maybe we need to address it better this time. So that's the way that I would address that question. Does that help? Does that answer it?
Thanks, Kirsty.
I can maybe pick it up as well from there. First of all, just to say that I definitely agree on the continuity and stability of the team to maintain that memory. But in addition, I was very lucky that the previous director of the lab created two figures, two roles in the lab manager and the project manager. And these two figures are very important to maintain exactly those relationships and trust. So the project manager in particular for new ideas that come our way and active projects where he or she in this case can keep track of high-level deliverables and follow the process. And the lab manager for completed projects, so things that are already not really in active development but that we still somehow maintain, usually under a service level agreement. And so that's very important to, again, kind of maintain expectation, define responsibility, especially when people move institutions. So I think having people with responsibility to keep track, at least at a high level, maybe not on the very detailed development level of those relationships is very important. Another thing I wanted to say that to kind of build trust, one of the ways in which we found most useful way to build a relationship with researchers is via really early engagement prior to funding applications. In our case, most of the time, researchers come to us without funding, so we need to work together to get that funding. So as early as possible, starting those conversations is very useful. And if in addition there is some seed funding for proof of concept or experiments, that really is so crucial to build that trust and then going forward to engage in more fruitful collaboration. So those were, I think, the two things that I wanted to say. There was also, I think, the second part of the questions on what do we know about other collaborative disciplines, or I would say processes. Another thing that I think we found very useful in the lab is to have a common language around what we call monitoring methods for the lab. And there are obviously different sources of inspirations. People might use different flavors, for example, of Agile or the kind of methodologies around software development. In our case, we adapted a little bit the Agile DSDM framework to a research context, and that kind of reference is what also keep us connected in terms of the same language, for example, about pre-project phase, feasibility assessment, and so on. So that has also been very useful for us.
Thanks, Arianna. Yes.
Can I follow up on Kirsty, on your remark with experts in our field? So I've done a lot of projects. I was very happy over the last few years that I was involved in a lot of these Excalibur things, which gave me a long-term opportunity to collaborate with DRI professionals. Not all of them have been successful. There were failures, quite a lot. I'm not going to talk about those. So let's have a look at the very successful ones. And if I reflect now, Excalibur is coming to an end, isn't it? When I reflect what were the good ones, in all of those, the digital research professionals, what we did matched, I think, their intrinsic interest. So it was, the successful ones were not the ones where we just went and said, what kind of service can you provide out of this is what we offer the menu at the restaurant, yeah, take this and this and this. It was always a dialogue. What do you enjoy most and what can you bring to the table? That was kind of the baseline of the most successful collaborations. That has its downsides. One of the drawbacks is that I might have to adopt my working plan to what the other side likes. It also puts a lot of stress on the money received on the digital research professional side, because you have to tell us exactly what your expertise and your interests are. Might, by the way, not be the same. Also, as a footnote, it was not very successful in at least 2 cases where I lost at the end of the day the digital research professional because they continued with a PhD or found out what they really want to do. But I mean, that's both a disadvantage and also a success metric that we lost those people. But it was really, so it really depends on how you phrase digital research infrastructure professionals. Is it a mere service where I go in and I pick and I pay for it at the end of the day as a PI? Or do you prefer to start a dialogue and basically say, this is what I'm really, really interested in? And then obviously both sides have to ask themselves, does it align with the research strategy? And does it align with the academic ambitions that we have? Okay, I mean, at the end of the day, it's very clear at least what my metrics are, my success metrics against which I'm benchmarked. It's papers, it's more grant income, it's better teaching. This is all known, okay? And we have to see where do we meet in the middle so that everybody does what they enjoy most, because I'm really convinced that you can do the best job.
Yeah, and it's actually quite interesting that you've focused on papers, grant money coming in, because that's the reality of the situation.
That's the metrics. If someone tells me
that is your metric.
I'm not interested in papers, then I say, well, then maybe the university environment is the wrong place for you to work.
Exactly. And this is, I think, perhaps where it comes up against it, is that for us, we're looking at it, hey, why do people get into doing research, right? To make the world a better place, to find things out, to do things. But the reality of research culture is that that's the thing that you have to chase, even though that might be the thing that you wanted to be in it for. So us as digital research professionals are still very much looking at that idea that, hey, we want to make research more available, we want to make it reproducible, with replication studies, whatever it is you want to do with it. We want to make it easier for people to understand what we've done. So there is inevitably going to be a point where we say, hey, this is the way that it should be, and this is the way that you're coming at it. There needs to be a kind of middle ground. And just to follow up on what you said about, that your level of involvement, for me, some of the most amazing and interesting and rewarding things that I've done have been when I've been involved with researchers in projects right from before they put the funding in. Because then I can say, hey, what do you want? Like, what is your objective at the end of this? What is your output? What do you want? And they say, well, I want to get policy changed. What is your need? What is your motivation? I want to get policy changed. I want to change the way that we do this thing as a community, the environment. And at that point, I can say, well, if that's what you need to do, then we can change your research structure, the way that it's done, so that we can share that bit, and we can do that bit, and we can do that bit. And it means that we're coming together so that I can map what their needs are onto what infrastructure we've got. And I think that's actually the job that I think is the most rewarding, because then you know that you're making the best of what you've got, and you're trying to serve the end game.
Okay, following up from what Kirsty was just saying, what do you think, what role does transparency play in achieving these roles or building these relationships between the DRI professionals and the researchers? So, yeah.
Can you repeat the question again?
So what role does transparency in the roles and goals play when building relationships between professionals and researchers, the DRI professionals and researchers? Do you have a lot of transparent processes? Do you use a framework that helps with building the relationships?
Yeah, I can start if you want. So we do have, so you're basically asking us what did we put in place in terms of transparent processes and roles. So again, in our case, we were lucky that the funding director of the lab negotiated with HR at the institutions and the relevant national networks, in particular RSE Society UK, defined roles for the people in the lab. So from the engineers, so we know that for research software engineers now in the community, the definition of roles has become a bit more mature. So there it was easier, if you like, but we didn't have that definition. So now we have a document that says on paper, what does it mean to be a research software engineer, a senior research software engineer, a principal research software engineer, what are the expectations, what are the responsibilities, and so on. Roughly, how is the workload model defined? And then we have the same for other roles in the lab. So I mentioned the lab manager, the project manager, analyst. In my community, in the research domains where I work, the analyst is very important because the spectrum of digital literacy in the community varies a lot. So there might be researchers that come to us with some idea of digital methods, but they never worked with it. So the analyst is the kind of intermediary there that has enough knowledge of the research domain and enough exposure to technical processes and methods to kind of bridge there and bring together the more technical, skillful people in the team with the researchers. And then we have on the other side people that already experimented a lot with digital methods, where the analyst role is a bit different. It becomes more like a daily project manager following deliverables and so on. So in terms of roles, we have that. Doesn't mean that we've solved everything. I know we have discussions in the retreat about career progression, for example. So we have the roles defined, but we don't necessarily have career pathways there or ways of enabling promotion yet. But that's a research culture issue very much. The other things I want to say in terms of responsibilities, I think it's quite, in terms of building that trust, I think it's quite important to be transparent with the researchers about these processes that you put in place. So we try to share from the beginning, for example, estimating the cost of our collaboration, sharing high-level requirements, checking whether we're understanding that we're going to do the same, that we understand the same about the things that we want to do, all the way to then having some way of documenting the project as it progresses in an open way. So we have regular reviews with partners and a kind of high-level documents that tracks or documents the progress during a project.
Thanks, Arianna.
I feel a little bit uncomfortable with the phrasing of this question. I think that's the job of us sitting here, isn't it, to say something controversial? It won't be controversial. Won't be controversial at all. But if you think about, how do you ensure that there is transfer, then you implicitly say that there is two different camps. Okay? There's the academia there and something else there, and I think this is the reason for a lot of bad things that happen or things that don't work out. I don't feel particularly comfortable with that. I said before that I would like to have everybody's intrinsic motivation, which is kind of, that should be at the core of both of this whole ecosystem. The notion here suggests that there is a distinct academic work style versus a professional work style. I don't like that either. I mean, I would prefer everybody who is involved in digital research infrastructure to go to seminars like academics, to be involved in all the day-to-day work to a certain degree. And we have professors in teaching. They're a part of the whole academic thing. That's great. They have a different type of job profile. Why is digital research infrastructure? Why is that a completely different thing? I sometimes struggle to understand that.
No, I think as digital research people, we actually completely agree with that.
It should be stronger integrated.
So it was interesting what you said about how much time, what our time's going to cost. Yeah, our time, my time, can't be bought. I mean, literally, it can't be bought. There's no mechanism for it. I could spend 4 weeks working on something, which would have been my entire consumption of my daily working life, and that's quite a lot of professional services people. That is the reality. It's the structure of research culture, and we're still, that hasn't caught up with us trying to work together rather than in very distinct boxes. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed, because that would help with all that transparency, because everyone knows what they're in it to do. Yeah.
It's also funny, isn't it, when you think about how much, so just think at your institution, how much code, for example, is written by PhDs.
Yep.
I would assume that's the majority of code, okay? It's not, so having two different camps, well, also tells you something what you think about the quality of the code that PhDs write, but professors is worse, okay? But I struggle with that notion of camps, and then we need transfer processes between those camps. No, you don't need the camps, and you don't need any. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Audience, please feel free to ask your questions via Slido, or maybe also raise your hand if you have questions also online. The next question is, can you describe a key action all DRI teams should take to ensure trust between DRI professionals and researchers? Key action all DRI teams should take to ensure trust.
I think I already talked enough about the transparency and the responsibility, so I'm not going to add anything there. But one thing about what you were just saying, I agree that we have to be very careful to create dichotomies in research and consider the contribution of different roles, no matter what your role is, what your label is, what your status is, and so on. But at the same time, we also have to be careful that sometimes not creating roles and definitions actually has an implication for the fairness of labor conditions for people. So the idea of the DRI professional, to me, is actually very important, and it will become more and more important especially in the higher education sector. And there are changes in the research culture that are going towards expanding, for example, the way accreditation and evaluation of research is done beyond papers, including, for example, software. So we have to recognize that there is, again, a spectrum there of roles that are very research active, that go from the postdoc, PhD, pathway, and in a way are very akin to academic role. Maybe they don't do as much teaching, but they really align with the traditional pathways to research. But we also, in the DRI space, we have very, very technical roles that are much more closer to ITS support and services, and we shouldn't shy away from the word services if we think of services as part of research. So I mentioned, for example, that project around the migration of our infrastructure into central services. That was a very, very technical piece of work. And the system manager that led that work is not going to publish a paper about it. That's not his job. He's still very busy in upgrading, in patching things, in making sure that this environment is stable, following best practices. It's still contribution to research, but it's a different kind of role. And I cannot expect from him the publication of research papers and so on. So I think we have to be definitely respectful and clarify that the collaborations are peer with the DRI professionals, but also that there are different roles on the table, and they need to be recognized for what they are.
I also would like to thank you for highlighting that this is one of the things that I think some of us struggle with as professionals in a professional services role, is that because you become the person that somebody can ask something of, you end up taking on way more. And then as a result of that, there's not a need identified across the wider institution that we actually need to create a role to do this. And we end up incredibly taking over work which really is not, whilst it's kind of loosely attached to our remit, might not necessarily be the whole thing that we should do. So I think it's really important to recognise that if you don't have those clearly defined roles, you've got no boundary to say, actually that belongs to somebody else, that's their job to do. And you know, keep me in the loop, because we may need to address a policy, a procedure, a workflow, but that's not, I don't have capacity, and that's because I need to do my actual day job. So that's important. To the question about what should we be doing, I think, yes, there's all this stuff about best practice. We should still be putting ourselves forward to say, hey, this is there's a better way of doing this. We might have come up with a new thing here. What do you think about this? Could this be useful to you? Like a new procedure or a new way of reframing something that might help do things differently. So at Bristol, we have a sensitive data process. And that's because we've got the system set up with ACRC, and our digital infrastructure means that we can do this particular thing. We can share it with researchers only. And we take that out to other institutions, and we take that out to conferences and say, hey, if you don't call it data, you call it personal information and study data, you can separate these things, you can tidy up what you're doing with your data at the end of it, you know where you're storing it, you know how long you have to store it for, so that's helping with your infrastructure, that's helping with sustainability, it's helping the curation process. So we go out and we kind of take those things forward to other people, because that's us saying to our community of like-minded people, is this a better way of doing it? It works for us. You know, your mileage may differ, but please have a go, see if it's any use to you. And one of the other things that I'm involved with, just quickly, is that Sonrai in Ireland are doing, they're investigating the use of micro-credentials for digital research infrastructure type professionals. And that's from an EOSC Skills for Research project that they did. And that's one of the things that's quite important for us. It's like, you know, if we are experts in our field, we might have a library MSc or some other kind of thing that would indicate that we know what we're doing, but there's nothing specific to this thing. And then you hit that level where you're like, I can't show that I'm actually an expert in this. You could have been doing it for 15 years, but if you haven't got a qualification, you've got that glass ceiling on how far you can progress in terms of your career and your capacity to do new things and try new things, because you get a bit jaded.
Great. So there are questions from the audience. How can organizations maintain employee trust in their EDI, DEI commitments amidst the rise of tech bro cultures? If anybody wants to take that.
That's a thorny one. So what do we want to...
I think this is a very good question. One thing I can say that we're trying to, when I say we, is obviously the institution as a whole, first of all, is trying to push for is different mechanisms to set up recruitment processes to start with. So, for example, the description of our roles have changed quite a lot from the first calls for ads in the lab. So now we try to foreground actually some of the EDI aspect of the lab and some of the team culture before even talking about the specificity of the knowledge domain or technical knowledge and so on. So there have been some changes, at least in the language, to allow for that. Also, so this is more specific to the lab, but the institution as a whole now almost requires to have panels where there is gender diversity at least, and usually also different competencies. So you always have to have an external in the panel. Ideally, you have to have someone that brings in, that is a specialist or has some attention and knowledge around EDI aspects. So some things have changed, and there is always also in the interviews a question around diversity, which is interesting in terms of what it brings out of those candidates. These are small steps, I think, but something.
I can give a try on the trust thing, because we've started from that before. So I trust people the most that get their job done. So what can you do to destroy trust is exactly if you don't take ownership. If I have a problem, okay, and with every tiny step I have to go there and ask, so it's a little bit of consumist attitude. I trust those people the most, whereas here I have a problem and they sort it out. And that holds for a bug in my code. okay, that holds for my financial worksheets, whatever, my finance worksheets, that holds for events, okay, if I can, that builds up trust. If I know that this is off my desk, that helps me a lot. That is really where I benefit. So if you want to destroy it, just come back 2 weeks later and say, oh, that action item is still open. Yeah, okay. So is embedded or centralized better? That's the wrong question, okay. There is a lot of external constraints in institutions, but also it depends on the job. If I have a challenge which is extremely domain specific, then maybe the embedded one is in the pole position to solve it. If it's a more cross-cutting, whatever challenge, or something where you have to integrate with other groups at the university, then centralized might be better. But you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I think it's really an attitude thing and how people get on with their job. So I think that question is nothing for me, at least, to solve. That's above my pay level, whether embedded or whatever is better. But it's really, what makes a big difference is whether you take ownership of processes and of challenges, or whether you define yourself as you tell me what to do next week, and then in 2 weeks' time I will come back and will tell you, well, it took longer than anticipated. But then, yeah, that doesn't help that much.
Did anybody want to describe a situation where their trust was broken and how you avoided it happening how you would avoid it happening in the future?
Yeah, for me, trust is broken if I have deadlines and things are not delivered on time. Okay, that happens all the time. Probably I've done that with colleagues as well. Mea culpa. But that is kind of how you kill trust. Okay, you don't meet deadlines, you don't take ownership, you don't sort out the underlying problems.
I think there's a very similar question on Slido as well. What in your experience has destroyed trust between DRI and researchers, and what can we learn from this? If anybody wants to add to that question.
Maybe not saying no early enough. Like to go to the other side, that directly goes into the ownership. Like on one hand, yes, you want to make the researcher happy and give them what they want, but you need to, of course, bring that together with what is actually realistic. And I think most researchers are much more open to an early no than oh, I couldn't do it 2 weeks before the deadline that you originally agreed to.
Yeah, I can bring at least 2 examples where we had, one was a very small project where the funding was very, very minimal, and we thought we had described well enough what we could do with that small amount of funding, but actually during the course of the project it emerged that the researcher was expecting much more. So that taught us a lesson, and now one of the things we tend to do also for small projects is including what we call default requirements. So for example, even if you have a very small project, most likely you need some project management time, and that's going to eat part of that work and of that time. And there's other default requirements that we now include. The other case was instead a much larger project with a researcher that was very high profile, and the project incurred several delays, which again, I think is something we incur all the time. So it needed escalations. In the end, obviously, we did deliver, and the partners were happy. But again, it taught us, I think, to be a little bit more careful in terms of monitoring larger projects. So now one of the crucial function of the project manager is to work very closely with the principal of research software engineering in organizing quarter planning, but also every 2-week time box planning, so that we have an awareness across the team of what are the most important project to work within a certain period, possible conflicting deadlines, and so on. So that, I think, has kind of tightened a little bit monitoring methods. And it might not be the case for other DRIs, but in our case, we work at the same time on multiple projects at different stages. So without that, we really risk sometimes to lose it and to indeed encounter issues with trust, which we don't want to do. We also tend to be a bit more transparent with partners. For example, if we have a situation where we lose a member of staff and we need to recruit. So we kind of alert partners in advance, even if there might not be delays, but say, hey, we have this issue now, we're trying to handle it. Everything might be fine, but we might have to ask an extension of your project at no cost. So we've become a little bit more proactive in managing the communication, I think, as a lesson learned from previous failures or problems.
I can perhaps answer this question from the perspective of an academic. So sometimes we as academic fail to see the value of the suggestions that the RSE put into the mix. And so it has happened to me. I talked to an RSE and what they told me was, to me, didn't make sense, didn't increase the value of the code that would be generated. So I just decided not to go with the RSE and do it the way I thought was the right way. And then I realized that it wasn't much further down the line. And I think the problem from the perspective of the RSE was that I did not understand what value the suggestions brought. And perhaps the RSE I was talking to didn't realize that I had not realized. And so that was probably, so make sure that whenever you suggest something, it's clear to the researcher why you are suggesting it and what value that brings. Maybe in the future, maybe there will be some changes that will not be required later on.
That would actually be the one thing that I would say that breaks trust from our perspective as well, is that we say, hey, have you factored in enough time in your research bid to do your once weekly, once fortnightly stock check of how you've, labelled your data, metadata, naming conventions, whether you've filed it correctly in the infrastructure that you had set out at the time you wrote your data management plan with us. Have you done these things? Have you put enough time aside? And they say, yeah, that's fine. And then later on, further on down the line, they're like, well, I haven't done that thing. So, but that was your roadmap to get here. So it's that like you say, it's the potential for what we say not being valued. And I think it's not necessarily that we don't realise that you might not have realised it. It's probably just that at the time, everyone in that conversation is not being mindful of what is really going on. The person just wants to get the thing done. They just say, yeah, let's just get it done. Let's just sort this thing out. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's got that time, and that's the environment again, right? That's research culture. Everyone's so pressured to do everything immediately. We're doing more with less. And I think sometimes it probably would be useful for all of us to get that trust back, would be just to say, stop, take a minute, and say, do you understand what I'm saying here? Because these are the implications further on down the line.
Another question by Martin. I think Tobias slightly touched on it. Does embedding RSEs, etc., within academic groups increase trust or just reduce cross-communication? This question too.
I think to me that's crucial, actually, to have that, not a separation, but a connection and working together. That's exactly, I think, what you're talking about, being able to articulate the value. And sometimes doing it in abstract terms is very difficult, but when you start working with someone and you do it in practice, it's much easier. So to me, the embeddedness, whether it's an institutional embeddedness, meaning that there are RSCs that are within specific research domain, or embeddedness in the sense of processes, so working together is crucial to really make it a fruitful collaboration, in my opinion.
Yeah, and at the same time, there is a lot of things I don't know how to do that. And one of the greatest problems that I face at the moment, I mean, this is nice, this is a full house here. But if I go through our department, half the offices are empty, okay? So we now got so used to work from home. And this is poisonous for embedding someone for a short time into a group. It doesn't work. If someone knows how to solve that, because I would like to continue to work most of my time from home. I quite enjoy it.
Yeah.
Okay. But if I get an RSE for 3 months, 2 days a week into my team, it's problematic. If we would, my PhD students are worse, and my PDRAs, they don't come in. They barely come in when I'm in. So, and that is problematic, so I don't know how to solve that. So I think in a certain way, university and academic work patterns have really made the whole situation worse, and I don't know how to embed RSE's digital resource, same holds for our platforms experts, better into our teams if no one's there.
I think it's the same with that, like we're so used to email, Teams, whatever particular platform is being used in your institution, that when we're not in the same room with a person, you can't necessarily get a full sense of that conversation's not quite right. It's just, like I said, let's do the thing. And they said, did you actually get what I meant? And I think not being on campus, not being embedded, not being running live training events, not doing the faculty research director's lunch or whatever it is, those things where we used to be there and people could pick up, and it was those tiny serendipitous moments that would have the biggest effect on changing the way that we did things as an institution, because you just needed to get the right ear and then you'd get some traction. And I think that doing stuff on Teams, emails, it's just, people are not in the room when they're in the room online, right?
Yeah, and now please, and that will be my only political remark, and then I abandon that. Don't run around and feel superior morally and kind of because of these tech bros, okay? I disagree with most of what they say, but in almost every statement that you see now in the press from the Musks and friends, there is an element of truth. Well, if you outrightly deny all of it, you're no better than they are, okay? I'm not in favor of that everybody has to go back to the office.
No.
Definitely not. But we have to acknowledge that there is a problem there. If we don't acknowledge that and just say, oh, that's the other guys, the right whatever, they're all wrong, well, then you're no better than they are. So in that, and therefore I would like to skip that question here with the tech bros. Okay, it's not constructive.
No, it's not constructive, but at the same time, I think that, again, if you manage a team, or if you are whatever leader in your team, whether it's a technical leadership or management and so on, I do think that we do have some responsibility in acknowledging that there are some biases in society, right? Some problems, and if you know more about those problems, you also have some mechanism or some tools to tackle those problems. It might be that in our little world we can do little, but I think little is still better than nothing. And for example, it's a bit weird coming from a woman, right? But we know for a fact that, for example, women very rarely ask for promotions or to be recognized in terms of additional salary. So if you are a manager and you know that, you're probably going to do a little bit more to encourage those members of your team to thrive than you would with men. This is a very simple thing. There are many more that I'm not mentioning here, but being aware of some of those things, I think, will help us changing the culture. So we need to also have that openness to know a bit more about our own bias. And I might not maybe have less towards women, but I'm sure I have other bias towards other categories and other people and dimensions that I know less about. So I think in that sense, we should. There was something else you mentioned, but I can't remember what it was.
I didn't want to start around that.
No. But I think we agree.
Gender thing, that's a different topic, a separate topic. And what I meant is about collaboration and this thing with embedded versus whatever. De facto, a lot of our teams, research teams, fell apart, and we haven't done a particularly good job in terms of processes and whatever to find out what good collaboration models look like. I would like to keep the distributed asynchronous working style. To me personally, that's very important. But the amount of problems that arise from that is undeniable there. And I would like to see solutions to that. I don't have the answers, but that is a thing that is very, very important. That builds up trust. If you have a constructive working style that makes life more pleasant, it's also important. I have my home, I've done whatever. I prefer to be at home. We totally ignore that there's a lot of people who want to have an office as well, okay, which depend on that because you met a lot of people at work, okay? you build up social networks. That has disappeared. So what I would like to see is a better way how to interact, how to collaborate with a diversification of departments, obviously departments, different things, with everybody working from home. It's very difficult, okay? And I don't know how to manage it.
Yeah, I mean, again, obviously, I don't have a solution for that, but I can say that in our lab, there was always a lot of working digitally, in the sense that we communicate a lot via Slack. That's our main channel, even pre-COVID. Obviously, post-COVID, COVID created additional challenges, but also more flexibility, which has, again, in terms of diversity, some advantages. If you have career responsibilities, you have to pick up your kids, or you have other issues, you can work around that, and I think we all welcome that. But at the same, as you say, created also challenges. One way in which, and I'm not claiming that we solve the problems, but one way we try to keep that connection, first of all, we have very regular meetings. So every Monday, we have quite a lot of meetings within the team. And that's at least a way to making sure that we touch base really frequently as a team, but also specifically as within sub-teams. I think it's more of a challenge, as you say, for new people to join the team. Because obviously people that have worked together before face-to-face, for them it's much easier to kind of translate into a hybrid environment, but for new people, it poses a lot of difficulty. So one way, because in the past 3 years we had different people joining, and recently we had 2 more joining, we're trying to create more social moments. So we do at least once a month these days, becoming a bit more frequent, a day where everyone comes in. So again, if you plan it in advance, people can keep their flexibility. At least they know that day is a team day. Maybe I don't get a lot of work done, but it's a chance to chat with members of the team and to reconnect a bit. So that has been useful for us. And then another thing about the researchers' collaborations. Again, I agree, we meet much less with colleagues on the corridor or at the cafe, or those moments seem to have disappeared. One way in which we try, but I'm not really sure it's successful, it's still kind of pilot, is creating affiliations. So we're trying now to encourage researchers in departments and RACs and members of the DRI, if you like, of the lab, to become affiliates with the respective departments. So from departments, we do it for those that we think have already a strong interest in the application of digital methods. And from our side, we do it for those people that, for example, have worked in a specific domains, whether it's history, film studies, music, and so on, for longer than others. And we ask the respective, so in the case of the lab, we invite these affiliates to our social events, and they invite us to their, for example, departmental meetings or research seminars and so on. It doesn't always work, but sometimes via this connection, not only we recognize a little bit the existing relation, but we try to nurture it a bit. I'm not saying we solved it, but it's one way in which we're trying to address that problem.
All right, it's about time to end this session now. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. I'm sure you will be continuing the communication during lunch or during breaks. Thank you so much.